By the time Tom Bower released his 2026 book, the atmosphere surrounding the Sussexes had already changed dramatically. This was no longer the glowing rebel fairy tale from 2020 where two misunderstood royals escaped a cold institution. The mood had darkened. Public patience had thinned. Every interview, every documentary, every memoir, every statement was now being dissected line by audiences looking for contradictions. And Bower understood something dangerous about this moment. People were no longer emotionally reacting to Harry and Meghan. They were auditing them. That is a completely different phase of public perception. Once audiences stop feeling and start comparing timelines, the damage becomes harder to contain. And Bower's method is terrifyingly simple. He does not need hidden cameras or palace spies whispering in underground garages. He lines up public records beside public statements and waits for the fractures to expose themselves naturally. That is why his work causes panic. Because if you attack him personally but fail to dismantle the documents themselves, the audience notices. And according to critics, that exact cycle keeps repeating around the Sussex story again and again and again.
It's the first time in the history of the monarchy that this has happened. And therefore, we've all been asking, the doctor's name should be made public. You know that they put that outside with the easel, right? And then Harry, if we go by his narrative and spare, he says that Meghan Markle went to the hospital, the Portland hospital, and then she humped a ball, that she was put in the bathtub. She was given not one, but 2 epidurals. I am a mom. I have had my child by using an epidural. Doctors will never put you in a bathtub if you have an epidural because you have a tube sometimes, you know. They can't be pulling you out of the water, can get in. All kinds of things can happen. And then Harry in his book says that within 2 hours of the child being born, they were back at Frogmore Cottage. Those are his words. Those are not my words. Those are his. And then if that is the case, that means that this woman with not one, but 2 epidural, with a very difficult birth, geriatric, was literally cleaned up. The baby was smacked, wrapped, put in a van, and sent back because it takes almost an hour from Portland Hospital to go to Frogmore Cottage.
Yes.
How can this woman be allowed? That is a medical liability.
The Lilibet naming controversy became another perfect example. At first, the announcement sounded emotionally flawless. Their daughter would be named after the Queen's deeply personal family nickname, a touching tribute, a symbolic olive branch. Headlines exploded with warmth. But then within days, everything cracked apart publicly. BBC reporting suggested the Queen had not actually been asked for permission in the way the Sussexes implied. Suddenly, there were competing narratives again. Palace insiders saying one thing, Sussex representatives saying another, lawyers becoming involved, public statements flying in opposite directions, and once again, nobody could fully force the timelines to align cleanly. What made the entire situation so combustible was the emotional symbolism attached to the name itself. Lilibet was never just a nickname. It was intensely personal to Queen Elizabeth II, tied directly to her relationship with Prince Philip. Reports circulated that after Philip's death, the Queen no longer wanted the nickname publicly used around her. Then, suddenly, Harry and Meghan announced their daughter as Lilibet Diana. Supporters called it beautiful. Critics called it manipulative. And the palace? Silence again. Always silence. The monarchy's favorite weapon and its greatest weakness at the same time.
All royal births from 1688 until 1936 were witnessed by the Home Secretary, and thereafter the Home Secretary's presence was deemed to be unnecessary because you had the royal obstetricians and you had unimpeachable witnesses to the birth of those children who would then sign off officially on the announcements. Every royal birth, with the exception of Archie's and Lilibet's, has been signed off by a host of royal doctors.
Then came another problem. The BBC stood by its reporting. The Sussexes stood by theirs. Neither side backed down, which meant the public was once again left staring at 2 completely incompatible versions of the same event. And once audiences see this pattern enough times, they begin assuming every future statement may also contain hidden gaps. That is how institutional trust slowly erodes, not through one giant scandal, but through dozens of small smaller contradictions accumulating like cracks spreading across glass. Meanwhile, critics started focusing on another deeply uncomfortable detail surrounding Archie's birth: the photographs themselves. Compare the Sussex rollout to the Cambridge children and the difference becomes almost cinematic. When Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, introduced George, Charlotte, and Louis, the sequence was immediate and public. Hospital steps, live cameras, press pools, real-time visibility. Exhausted parents smiling into chaos while the world watched history happen in real time. Whether people liked the monarchy or not, the visual transparency created certainty. But Archie's first appearance felt completely different. No hospital steps, no crowds, no same-day reveal. Instead, the public received carefully staged images 2 days later inside Windsor Castle under tightly controlled conditions. Beautiful lighting, perfect framing, controlled access. And according to critics, that became the defining Sussex formula: reject public intrusion while simultaneously curating maximum narrative control. Privacy, but selectively monetized. Distance, but strategically photographed. Silence, but only until a media rollout was ready.
And another thing that I know that they do, if a royal lady who's about to give birth, there's 2 phone calls that the security team makes. One to the palace to inform Her Majesty that, she's gone into labor. And 2, that to the security, the head of security, to secure the premises where they go. Harry claims that they didn't do any of that. That means that the Royal Police Protection Officers violated security protocol, which will be a first. So I had so many questions. I wrote to Parliament. I sent you the emails for a Freedom of Information Act request. I just wanted them to verify to me that the baby was born in Portland in the names of the doctors, which should be of public information because those children are included in the line of succession. You read what they sent to me. They said that they're not in the business of delivering babies, which is a very weird answer to give because Parliament is in charge of verifying that all royal children meet the legal requirements to be in the line of succession, and documents are sent to them.
And that perception became incredibly dangerous because once audiences believe someone is carefully managing visibility, every future omission starts looking intentional. Every delayed detail becomes suspicious. Every correction becomes evidence. Every inconsistency becomes part of a larger pattern. Then the conversation around Harry's memoir Spare reignited everything all over again. Because inside the book, Harry described Archie's birth emotionally and personally, but his version of events created fresh comparison points against Meghan's Oprah interview and Buckingham Palace's official statements. And this is where the story becomes psychologically fascinating. None of the versions are necessarily impossible individually. The issue is that together they create an unstable narrative landscape where motivations constantly shift depending on timing and audience. The Oprah interview framed Meghan as isolated and emotionally abandoned by the institution. Harry's memoir leaned heavily into trauma, resentment, and personal memory. Buckingham Palace communicated like a legal department trying to reveal absolutely nothing beyond mandatory facts. 3 perspectives, 3 agendas, 3 emotional realities orbiting the same event. And according to Bauer, that disconnect itself is the real story. Because when public trust collapses, people do not just question what was hidden. They question why certain details were emphasized so aggressively while others disappeared entirely. Why control the optics so tightly? Why remove names from birth documents? Why break royal precedent repeatedly in ways guaranteed to create speculation? Why allow confusion to linger for years instead of shutting it down decisively with full transparency? And this is where the mood surrounding the Sussexes allegedly shifted from sympathy into suspicion. Critics stopped seeing them as victims fighting the monarchy and started seeing them as media operators managing a global brand. That distinction changes everything. Because brands survive through emotional manipulation, selective access, carefully timed disclosures, and narrative engineering. Royal institutions historically operate similarly, which means suddenly the Sussexes in the palace looked less like enemies and more like rival PR machines fighting for control over the same storyline. Then came the most brutal part of Bauer's argument. He claimed the Sussex response pattern itself reveals weakness. According to him, direct factual rebuttals almost never arrive. Instead, the attacks target motive, tone, cruelty, obsession, harassment, media toxicity. But if the facts themselves were completely false, critics ask why not simply dismantle them piece by piece? Why not name the doctor? Why not fully explain the certificate amendment process in precise detail? Why not publicly reconcile the contradictory timelines once and for all? And that question hangs over this entire saga like a thunderstorm refusing to break. Because the longer these inconsistencies remain unresolved, the larger the mystery grows in public imagination. That is the real danger now. Not necessarily the facts themselves, but the vacuum surrounding them. Humans instinctively fill silence with speculation, and the Sussex story has become filled with silence. Strategic silence, legal silence, palace silence, emotional silence, the kind of silence that creates entire industries of analysis online. Now suddenly old details are being re-examined with fresh eyes. The missing obstetrician on the easel, the altered birth certificate, the hospital secrecy, the delayed photographs, the conflicting narratives, the Lilibet dispute, the repeated collisions between Sussex statements and later public corrections. Individually may be survivable. Together, they create a perception problem spiraling beyond anyone's ability to fully control anymore. And perhaps that is the most explosive part of all this. Not whether every criticism is fair, not whether every suspicion is justified, but the realization that this entire story could have been neutralized years ago with radical transparency. Instead, every chapter seems to generate fresh ambiguity, fresh contradictions, fresh confusion, which means the audience never emotionally exits the story. The uncertainty keeps the controversy alive indefinitely. And the deeper this story goes, the more the entire situation starts feeling like a collision between two competing obsessions. The monarchy's obsession with protecting the institution at all costs, and the Sussex's obsession with controlling their own narrative at all costs. That combination creates absolute chaos because neither side fully trusts the public with raw truth anymore. Everything becomes filtered, sanitized, strategically released, carefully worded, and when every sentence feels engineered, audiences begin treating every appearance like an interrogation instead of a family update. What makes this even more explosive is that the Sussexes originally built their global image around authenticity. That was the promise. They positioned themselves as the honest voices finally exposing what really happens behind palace walls. The brave truth tellers escaping institutional manipulation. But the moment audiences started catching contradictions inside their own timelines, the emotional foundation underneath that image began cracking badly. Because people can forgive drama. They can forgive rebellion. They can even forgive royal chaos. But once audiences suspect emotional manipulation, the backlash becomes brutal. That confusion became fuel for an entire ecosystem of royal commentators who noticed something deeply unusual about the Sussex strategy. Whenever they demand privacy, publicity somehow follows immediately afterward. When they reject royal traditions, alternative media rollouts appear carefully staged instead. When critics focus on contradictions, emotional framing suddenly dominates the conversation again. It creates the feeling that every conflict simultaneously harms and benefits the Sussex brand at the exact same time. And according to critics, that contradiction sits at the center of everything. Because think about the timing of all this. Every major Sussex media event arrives attached to maximum emotional stakes. Oprah came during royal tensions. Spare arrived during ongoing institutional conflict. Netflix documentaries appeared during collapsing family relationships. Bauer's investigations landed exactly when public skepticism had reached new highs. Each release reignites the previous controversies instead of burying them. The cycle never ends because the story itself has become commercially valuable. That is the uncomfortable realization many royal watchers are starting to confront publicly now. And then there is the palace itself, frozen between defending the monarchy and avoiding escalation. Buckingham Palace historically survives through silence because responding emotionally risks making scandals larger. But in the digital age, silence often creates the exact opposite effect. It allows speculation to metastasize uncontrollably online. Every refusal to clarify becomes interpreted as concealment. Every vague statement becomes suspicious. Every missing detail becomes a viral theory within hours. That is why Archie's birth controversy refuses to die, because nobody ever truly closed the loop publicly. The monarchy did not fully explain the procedural breaks from tradition. The Sussexes did not aggressively eliminate the contradictions critics highlighted. The media kept finding fresh angles. And then Bauer arrived, lining every inconsistency side by side aside like evidence on a courtroom wall. What terrifies supporters of Harry and Meghan is not necessarily the accusations themselves. It is the possibility that the public has emotionally shifted into there must be something here territory. Once audiences cross that psychological line, disproving rumors becomes infinitely harder because every denial gets absorbed into the larger suspicion framework. That is exactly what happened to countless celebrities, politicians, and royal figures throughout history. Once trust fractures, ambiguity becomes poison. That is exactly why Bauer's work landed so hard in 2026. He did not need to prove some giant hidden conspiracy. He simply documented how many foundational details remain publicly disputed years later. That alone was enough to reignite the fire. Because the public realized something shocking, despite endless interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and headlines, huge sections of this story still feel strangely unresolved. And perhaps the most devastating part for the Sussexes is this: even people who dislike the monarchy are beginning to question them now too. That changes everything, because once skepticism spreads beyond traditional royalists into mainstream audiences, the protective emotional shield disappears. Suddenly, people are not defending sides anymore. They are comparing contradictions. And contradictions are cold, ruthless. They do not care about victim narratives or institutional loyalty. They simply sit there waiting to be explained. Now, another storm is already forming. More biographies are coming. More serialized extracts are scheduled. More legal disclosures continue entering public record. Every new release threatens to reopen the exact same questions the Sussexes have spent years trying to emotionally outrun. And according to critics, the biggest vulnerability remains the same one it always was: the inability to establish one clean, stable, universally accepted timeline that survives comparison against every previous statement already on the record. That is why this controversy feels endless, because unresolved contradictions behave like unfinished chapters. Audiences instinctively expect another reveal to come later that finally makes everything make sense. But instead, each new revelation only creates fresh confusion layered on top of the old confusion. The story expands instead of resolving.